science fans, and welcome to SHE-ensya. Today, we will be talking about research ethics. We will start first by talking about the rationale behind research ethics. We will then move on to what is expected when you are responsibly conducting your research, and this will be grounded on the ethical principles outlined in the Belmont Report. Apart from this, we will talk about informed consent and how to get this properly, the ethics review process of the Salle University, and then also other ethical standards that we are expected to follow. So let's begin. As an institution, DLSU commits itself to the generation and propagation of new knowledge for human development and social transformation. What this means is, apart from us teaching students about specific kinds of knowledge, either in the sciences, in the humanities, or in the social sciences, as an institution, we are geared also to create new information through research. But whenever we do this, we have to follow a strict conduct of research. And this is governed by a system of moral principles that aims to maintain the highest standards of duty, professionalism, and quality. In order for us to be reminded of this regularly, we have the DLSU Code for the Responsible Conduct of Research that is made available by the Research Ethics Office. Research proposals are regularly reviewed by the Ethics Review Board to ensure that our methodologies follow these principles. The importance of having a code of conduct for researchers is best exemplified from the abuses that happened in World War II during the Nazi experiments. I will show you here two examples, and they can be quite disturbing. So a warning to our viewers and listeners. One set of experiments that the Nazis did during this time was experiments on twins. They actually experimented on more than 1,500 twins by injecting colored dyes into their eyes to see if this would change their behavior or to see if they would have different or similar responses. Apart from this, they would artificially sew together twins to see if they can create conjoined twins. These experiments resulted to some important findings in the field of medicine, but at the same time, it also resulted to the suffering of these individuals. Another set of experiments was high-altitude tests performed on 200 prisoners in decompression chambers. This was to determine the best means of rescuing pilots when they are abandoned in their planes in high altitudes. 80 prisoners died outright during the performance of these experiments, and the rest were executed in order to get their brain tissue. Again, the data produced from these studies were very important in the field of medicine and in the field of emergency care for rescue. However, so many people suffered in order for us to get that data. And it is this suffering that we are trying to prevent. After World War II ended, the Nuremberg trials began. And here, 23 German doctors were put into trial for doing medical experimentation on concentration camp inmates and other living human subjects without their consent. And here, I would like to emphasize the importance of consent. You cannot do any procedure to any human being without them fully understanding what is going to happen and without them fully giving their conscious consent. These doctors were found to have committed murders, brutalities, cruelties, tortures, atrocities, and other inhuman acts to their fellow humans. Again, this is something that we would not want to happen again. An output of the Nuremberg trials was the Nuremberg Code that was drafted in 1947. As part of the verdict, the court enumerated some rules that scientists and doctors need to follow. And it involves voluntary consent, which means you have to acquire the permission of your patient or the individual that you would be running the tests to before you perform the experiment. This consent has to be voluntary given, meaning they should not be bribed, they should not be coerced, and they should not be forced in order to participate in this experiment or exercise. Second edict is that benefits should outweigh the risks. The experiment should have a significant impact to the improvement of the lives of many people or the person himself or herself that will be doing the experiment. The third is that at any point during the experiment, the subject should be given the right to terminate the participation. This means that if they feel uncomfortable in continuing the experiment, nobody should force them to continue being part of the experiment. All of this was drafted to protect human life and the quality of human life that can be affected by the willful participation in human experimentation. In the 21st century, another type of research that can be morally vague would include internet research. And when we talk about internet research, and I think majority of our viewers know what I'm talking about, it is when you use the internet to collect data or information about certain individuals or certain cases, such as when you do online surveys, when you do online registration forms, when you archive existing materials that are present on the internet, or what we call automated means of data scrapping. Internet research often studies how people use and access the internet, such as when we collect and observe activities on social networks, blogs, chat rooms, virtual worlds, and other access points. When we do internet research, we process and analyze the data stored in different datasets, data banks, and other repositories available via the internet. It comes with the assumption that as long as it's in the internet, we are free to use it. But does this really apply? For example, there's Twitter. And if you actually read the terms of agreement or use, which I'm pretty sure a lot of you did not, tweets are actually immediately delivered via SMS or API to our partners and other third parties of the company, not just you as a user. This includes search engines, developers and publishers that integrate Twitter content into their services. And that's why you shouldn't be surprised that after you tweet about something, you suddenly receive advertisements about particular products that are close to the topic of your tweets. Institutions such as universities and public health agencies are also allowed to view these tweets in order to analyze the information for trends and insights. So, when you share information or content like photos, videos, and links via Twitter, you should think carefully about what you are making public. You might be familiar with the quote that says, "What you post in the internet, it will be there forever." So this can actually be made true because even if you delete a particular content, a copy of it has already been sent to the partners of that social media agency. So when you do internet research, you have to ask yourselves the following question. First, is it okay to mine social media data for research purposes? Second, are social media data public or private? It's very easy for us to say that, hey, you posted it, so now it belongs to the internet and therefore it belongs to everyone. However, ask yourself again, especially for those of you who are active users of the internet. Does this really apply to all of the pictures, thoughts, and ideas that you put out in your social media? Remember, if it applies to one, then it applies to all. Third, can online platforms use and or sell your data for commercial and research purposes? First, the participants, which are your online users, are unaware that they are actually participating in the study. And this already violates one of the codes of the Nuremberg Act, which is that all participants should be willfully participating in the research. So people whose messages, their posts, their blogs, their tweets, that are being analyzed for research and or commercial purposes were not given the chance to give their consent to participate in the research. So that is problematic enough. But you can add to that the results can sometimes be published in a way that the virtual community that are being studied can be identified without their consent. So this violates a lot of people's privacy, and this could open them up to discrimination as well as discomfort. And lastly, sensitive information, which is very much proprietary information, may be compromised through unauthorized disclosure or misuse. And this can cause harm to an organization, an online community, or an individual. For example, your chats in Facebook or in Twitter can actually be downloaded by a third party and can be used to share the information that you are talking about. Examples of this right now would be the advanced disclosure of patients who have COVID-19 without the permission of DOH. And this is very scary, mostly because sometimes we can say that, hey, someone looks like he's sick, and we already think he or she has COVID, but maybe they don't even have the confirmatory test done. So this can violate the privacy of the person who is already in discomfort in the first place, and apart from that, it can lead to unnecessary panic. So these are some of the parts of internet research that can be problematic. Let us now move on to the responsible conduct of research. And it can be divided into two paradigms. The first of which is what research ethics is actually defined as, and the other is what do you mean by research integrity. So if you're looking at the realm of research ethics alone, it can be defined as a set of behavior viewed from the perspective of moral principles. So it's looking at the disposition of the scientist and whether or not the scientist is unaware of the repercussions of the experiments that he or she will be doing. And the reasoning behind these experiments should be based on ethical and moral principles. When it comes to research integrity, we are now looking at research behavior viewed from the perspective of professional standards. So this is regardless of our actual beliefs and thoughts in this position, but it only focuses on our adherence to a preset rules or standards that our institution is imposing on us. So at the end of the day, even if we have different moral principles, research integrity is required for all of us, dependent on the institution that we are working for. So although atrocities has been done in the line of human research has also proven itself to be very important when it comes to creating information that are necessary for the improvement of human lives. Because of this, the Belmont Report was drafted to create a set of ethical principles for the protection of human rights in research. It can be summarized into three primary ethics, the first of which is called respect for persons. And the respect for persons revolve around the concept of autonomy and the protection of individuals with reduced autonomy. We will be discussing what autonomy means in a little bit, together with beneficence, which means the maximization of the benefits to an individual and the minimization of harms that can happen to that person. The third principle of the Belmont Report would be justice, which revolves around fairness in the selection of test subjects and distribution of burdens and benefits. Let's discuss autonomy. So autonomy is a principle that means that a person should be given respect, time, and opportunity to make his or her own decisions about the events that he or she will be participating on. The person should be given correct and proper information about the research to help him or decide whether or not to participate in the study. Apart from this, the concept of autonomy implies that no pressure to participate should be given and no sanction or punishment for non-participation should be suffered by the individuals. This principle is exercised through the process of informed consent. The second principle of the Belmont Report is on beneficence and non-maleficence. And this implies that whenever research is done, it has to be done for the good of all. So, a concept that plays in here would be conflict of interest. Whenever participants are asked to join in an experiment, is there any conflict that could arise that would lead to greater benefit for some and lesser benefit for others? Okay? So some of its implications include the following. First, the research design has to be sound and meet the standard of scientific quality. So this means that proper procedures are set to ensure the safety of all individuals involved, regardless of what treatments they will be undergoing. Apart from this, researchers should be competent to carry out the research in accordance with the relevant professional standards. And that's why there are some research processes that cannot be done by a senior high school student or an undergraduate student, a master's student, or a PhD student. There really are some skills that some of us get to learn at a later stage in our lives, and because of this, to ensure beneficence and non-maleficence, we do not allow just about everybody to do the experiments that you want to do. Apart from this, researchers should ensure the protection of the research participants, and the research should proceed with the research only when the risks are not disproportionate to its potential benefits. When it comes to justice, it's a concept a lot of us are familiar with, but at the same time, a lot of us don't fully understand. Some people define justice as the concept of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But if you actually want to define the meat of it, justice refers to the value of distributing benefits and burdens of research fairly, which means that everybody who are participating in the research should have the same amount of benefits and the same approximate amount of burdens. The implications of justice include that selection of participants should involve those groups who will benefit most from the research. So for example, if you're testing a cure for cancer, you try to maximize the participation of those who actually have the risk or the disease itself, and those who may not have the means to actually find treatment on their own. Apart from this, selection of participants should not result in making populations become more disadvantaged as a result of the research. So if you're looking at how a disease affects people, it's never an option to test this on those who are needy just because they will agree with you if you pay for them. Because this will result in greater risks and greater benefits to the actual participants. So justice applies to all or none at all. Anonymity means that the participant's identity cannot be linked to the data presented in the study. Every participant has the right to their own privacy, and you have to assume that the data collected will be kept confidential. Confidentiality, on the other hand, means that the researcher's management of private information shared by the subject is ensured, and that no leakage of the private information they have given you will reach the public. Another important aspect when designing your research that involves human subjects involves safety and security. When it comes to safety, you have to ask yourself, how can the safety of both the researchers and the test participants be ensured at all times? In science, for example, this includes the proper handling of laboratory devices. In the case of the social sciences, it means you should avoid collecting data in dangerous locations. For those of you involved in computing, it means that public data about your whereabouts should be protected. When it comes to security, some of the questions you also need to ask yourself involve the following. First, is the data collection site secure? Second, will the collected data be stored in a secure location? And third, will transmission of sensitive data be secured? The answer to all three questions should be yes. Other ethical considerations that you might want to think about would be privacy, intellectual property, and freedom of expression. For privacy, surveillance and monitoring without the subject's knowledge is not allowed. So for example, you can't record an interview using your camera or any recording device without getting the permission of your interviewee. GPS signals of individuals should not be collected not unless they allowed you to do it. Your own posts, check-ins, tweets can also be collected without your consent, so please be very careful with that, as well as your transactions online and through your credit cards. As for intellectual property, you have to acknowledge the owners of creative works, which include inventions, articles, designs, names, images, and source codes. This has been such a big issue online recently. If you're familiar with the event called Comiket, where local artists are allowed to sell and display artwork that they have created. Apparently, some sellers have been abusing this symposium by selling artwork that was not made by them, and at the same time, they do not credit the actual makers of this art. Because of this breach in ethics, the whole event is actually put into question, even if the organizers wanted to just give a mechanism for local artists to be known. So this is just a sad conclusion to such a very interesting event. Now, when it comes to freedom of expression, cyberbullying can happen if the identity of of the individuals that you're studying are not protected, and hate speech can ensue. But apart from this, when you are interviewing people, you can't force them to say what you want them to say. They have to be given the right to express their own thoughts and their own beliefs, whether or not it matches your expectations or the needs of your research. So, when you're doing your research that involves human participants, you have to be aware if they belong to any vulnerable groups. Vulnerable groups are those that lack the substantial capacity to protect their own interest, owing to impediments such as, first, the lack of capability to give informed consent. So for example, if they don't understand the language that they're using, if they can't read nor write, or if they don't have enough mental capacity to understand what's actually going on. Another possible reason is the lack of alternative means of obtaining the necessary services and other expensive necessities. So these are individuals who have no choice but to participate in your research in order for them to get what they need. Next, if they're also a junior or subordinate member of a hierarchical group, this could actually make them feel that they are being forced to participate in order for them to be accepted in the group. So be very, very careful when you're dealing with vulnerable groups to make sure that this does not bias your research and at the same time that you are following the correct ethical code. In 2010, Singapore actually made a statement of research integrity to encourage scientists to follow a more modern approach to research ethics. And this includes a demand for honesty in all aspects of research. So this is to avoid fabrication of data as well as falsification. Second, accountability in the conduct of research. You are now responsible for the outcomes of your research and how other people use it. And this can be pretty scary. Next, professional courtesy and fairness in working with others. So this includes proper co-authorship and acknowledgement during publications. And lastly, we should be good stewards of research on behalf of others. Let us now move on to the concept of informed consent. Informed consent is defined as a process by which a subject voluntarily confirms his or her willingness to participate in a particular study after having been informed of all aspects of the study that are relevant to the subject's decision to participate. This means that informed consent is a guarantee that the participants are fully aware of what will be happening to them, how the information collected from them will be processed, and how the data that was derived from this collection will be used in the future. So this will allow the participants to fully decide on whether or not they want to participate in your research or not. So why is informed consent necessary? There are several factors that make it important, which include, first, that your subject understands the nature of the study. Second, that your participants are informed of the purpose, risks, benefits, and alternative options and therapies. finally, the last one is to ensure that they are making a voluntary decision, not something that is forced, whether to begin or continue participation in the studies. Informed consent is actually important for two main events. The first is in dealing with research participants and communities. Good ethical practices in dealing with research participants involve voluntary participation and informed consent that ensures the safety and security of the respondents, as well as keeping the confidentiality of the respondents sacrosanct. And when you say sacrosanct, it means that it is almost sacred, something that you must protect. Another portion of the DLSU Code of Research Ethics that requires informed consent is on dealing with human subjects. Subjecting human beings or samples taken from their body to tests and experiments must only be done when there is a likely beneficial result to society. Not only must voluntary participation and informed consent be enforced, researchers must also uphold the dignity, protect the rights, guarantee the safety, and preserve the well-being of the human subjects. So this is a very, very grave responsibility. And that's why we have to make sure that you have the right skills and the right equipment to protect the rights of your participants. Now this next part could be done as a graded activity or as a part of recitation for class. So for those of you who are watching to find inspiration on how to teach research ethics in a classroom experience, you can read out the questions on these slides and ask your students what their answer would be. So which of the following would require an informed consent? 1. To test the effect of a new antidepressant drug. To test the effect of new milk substitutes on pregnant women. To test a plant-based substance as ingredient for mosquito repellent. To collect brainwave signals from learners while doing a learning activity. To collect facial expressions and gestures of children with autism. To study the interaction of children within a playgroup. To collect user data from various sources, such as social media posts for further analysis. Or to collect spending habits of consumers. To determine how users will respond to a new app. To study how users use certain software apps, hardware devices. To find out how users perceive a new software app and hardware device. So these questions are interesting because it will allow you feedback from your students as to whether or not they understand the concept of informed consent. As for my students who are watching this, I want you to answer these questions on a short bond paper and give justification for your answers for each part. I am expecting your submission by Monday next week.